Code reviews are an essential part of professional software development. When done properly, they can greatly help you ensure quality and knowledge sharing. But how can we make sure that code reviews are actually as productive and effective as possible? That's what we are going to talk about today. So, in my experience, there are several patterns for code reviewing that are positive and negative. And I want to give you a summary of the most important patterns to be aware of in my point of view. Let's start with the good reviewing practices first to see what is actually recommended to do. So number one that I would always keep in mind is it's a good idea to have a look at your own code first before you ask others to invest time in looking at it. So let's say you made a few changes, you did your commit and you're preparing a pull request. Now it really helps to take the time to go over your changes and look at them with some distance and seeing everything in the whole context of the change set that you did. Often we just, by doing that, we see some small mistakes that we did. Could be typos, it could be that there are sections which you could have written in a more clear way or simplify, and that will help a lot. Number two is in the actual review, take enough time for it and do not rush it. Now, I don't mean you should take the whole day or hours upon hours. I mean, you should give yourself enough time to actually read what the person changed and think about it. You should not rush it and pressure yourself to click the approve button fast, but you should really think about what the changes are and what it means. Then number three is focusing on asking questions and making suggestions. So instead of writing a comment like, I don't like this function, it's a pure mess, or something like, do it in this way, you should instead ask a question like, I see you chose library X. What were the reasons that you decided to use it? Or instead of asking questions, you could make suggestions like, how about we try it in this way? Would that make it more simple? Or I saw you did X in this way. Have you tried this and checked if it's more robust in your view? So that's a more productive way of communicating in my experience, and it cultivates a better communication in your team. Number four is related to that, and that's not just focusing on issues that you see with the code, but also considering giving a compliment for changes that you actually consider well done. When you see something that you think is really, really well done, you can write a short comment like, I saw you did this in a really simple and effective way. I didn't think of that. Great work. I think that goes a long way in actually showing that you value a good contribution to your code base. And then the last point is to actually keep the review sessions small. So there's actually research on that which shows that the effectiveness of code reviews decreases very strongly the longer it goes. So it should not be larger, ideally, than a few hundred lines max. Ideally, it's below 100 lines if possible, but of course that's not always the case. And it should take well below 1 hour to go through it, read it, and actually process it in your mind. So you should strive to keep change sets rather small. Then let's look at the other side, because by knowing what review practices are anti-patterns and usually bad, you can improve your effectiveness as well. So number one is not looking at the changes and just waving them through. So you know it. Sometimes you're under a high time pressure, there's a tight deadline, you want to help someone out, and they say, hey, can you please approve this? I need this really fast. And yeah, it makes sense to take the time then to help out and acknowledge that you have some time pressure. But just waving it through and clicking the approve button is really doing more harm than good, because then you don't need a review. Then you can basically remove it from your whole process. It doesn't serve any value for you then when you just click the approve button. And usually that practice will bite you sooner or later, because you missed something that you could have catched in a proper review. Number two is commanding changes with a top-down attitude. So maybe your team works more in a hierarchical way, and there are people who are longer there or more experienced. And maybe they have some top-down communication patterns where they say, this is really bad, do it like that, or don't do this, do that instead, and do it now. Of course, that's not good, because it's a bad communication practice, and people will not feel very well when cooperating in this way. So try to avoid it. Then there's blaming others for mistakes, which is closely related. Instead of focusing on mistakes, you should, of course, make issues aware and think about solutions. But even if someone, a very specific person, did a mistake that you consider really bad, you should not explicitly blame them for it, but instead say, hey, this is an issue because when we do this, it crashes, or something like that. Can you find a solution to this? Or how about we try this approach instead? It's much better than blaming others and just saying, you did this horrible mistake, how could you? That's not really helping the project to move forward. Then number 4 is kind of similar. It's a less direct way. That is when you imply that the author or reviewer is incompetent or not doing his or her best. It's basically a passive-aggressive way of blaming. And you probably know that from other sources in the internet. There are always negative comments which are not constructive, but more like an aggressive blaming way. And you should really avoid that. You should assume that the person who provided the changes did his or her best. And now you should find a constructive way to actually make them aware of issues and improvement potential. Number 5 is pressuring reviewers for fast approvals. So it goes hand in hand with not really looking at the changes. There could be some pressure from the other side when you say, hey, I need this really fast. Can you approve my review? We need to release soon. You can express that it's pretty urgent and ask them to take time soon, but you should not pressure them in a way that they are just waving the review through. It might work out once or twice, but then the third time you have some issue in there that could have been found in the review, or maybe it really degrades code quality because other people don't understand what you actually did there. And last but not least, there is trying to cover huge change sets in a single review sessions. So when you have thousands of lines and it takes more than 1 hour to do a proper review. A change set is usually too large to do it in an effective way. Even if the code is pretty simple or not that critical, you should strongly consider to split it up into multiple commits or changes. And when you can't do that, at least consider to review it in several sessions. So maybe you take half an hour, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, 2 or 3 times this day to actually complete it. That will be more effective, find more issues than when you try to do it in a single session. Okay, those were my good and bad review practices. In a nutshell, you can say that a good review practice is constructive. It actually supports and encourages a respectful communication in your team, and it supports useful feedback. On the flip side, bad reviewing practices are destructive in nature. They harm the code quality and they actually discourage future collaboration. It makes other people go into defense mode, and of course that will hurt your project in the long term. So that's about it for today. What do you think about these review suggestions? Is there anything you would add or change? For example, what do you think about pair programming? We can argue that pair programming is kind of a live review because you're doing communication, knowledge sharing, and basically a 4I principle right when you write the code. So you could say when you're doing pair programming, the review is included and you don't really need this extensive reviewing practice. Maybe just have a short look to see if every change that you saw is included. Tell me your opinion in the comments.